All right, guys, so welcome to another TypeScript video. And in this video, we're going to be learning how to add types to functions. So you may have already started to pick up that we have to add a type to everything, a variable, an object. So of course, one of the more common things that we use in programming is functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a lot of the basic function types and show you how to add types to them. So first we're going to do a function and we're going to call this function order total. And what it's going to take is the total and the tax. And what it's going to do next is return the total plus. All right. So this is a very basic function. But already we're getting some error messages, right? So if we were writing regular JavaScript, we wouldn't have any issues with this function that we just wrote. But because we're using TypeScript, it's giving us an error message here that says parameter total implicitly has an any type. And we don't want our types to just be anything, right? We want to be very, very specific about what type of values we're expecting. So to add types to this, what we would do is use a colon and say number, and same thing with tax and say number. And then after the function declaration, we want to also add a type and say, right? And now our error message is gone. All right. So this is just an example of just adding regular types to a regular function expression. Now we want to do something similar with functions that are stored as constants. So this next part, we're going to learn how to add types to a constant. So let's say const, and let's say added, or you know what, let's actually call it const cart total, right? And we want to say we have two values inside of our cart. We have a amount spent, which is going to be, it's going to be a string. And we're also going to have a number of items, which is also going to be a string. And if you follow the pattern from our previous function, we need to also write what type of function it is after the function declaration, right? And then instead of having those pesky curly braces, we can just write a return statement that's going to concatenate these two values with a template literal. And so we'll call the first one amount spent, and we'll call the next one, actually call the next one number of items. All right, so this is how you would concatenate and add types to a basic constant function, right? And so right here, what is it saying? It's saying variable cart total implicitly has an any type. So when we have this issue with any types, TypeScript is actually really good at inferring the type from our usage. Now, TypeScript only infers these types during compile time. It doesn't actually infer these types during runtime. So you can actually change this to, all right, and that should work now. All right, so that's an example of how to add types to a constant function. Now we want to move on and we want to talk about unions. So what are union types? Let's say we have a function that's called credit cards. So let's just say export const credit cards, and we want to set it equal to a couple things. So we're going to take a credit card number, which is going to be a number, and then we're going to take a expiration date, which is going to be string. All right, and remember, after we declare our function, we want to have two values here. So let's say our expiration date could be a string or it could be a number. So that's what union types are. It's when we have more than one type assigned to a particular value. And this mark right here, it kind of acts like an or operator, right? But it only has one slash. So now that we've done that, we need to continue following the pattern that we said before and declare a type to this function declaration. And then we're just going to do something simple. We're just going to return the concatenated value of this template literal, okay? And it's just going to take in a credit card number, and it's also going to take in an expiration date. Okay. All right, so that the whole point of me showing you guys that is just to show you that you may initially in your beginning stages think like, oh, everything has to be a number, everything has to be a string, everything has to be this. But union types allow us to have flexibility when it comes to how we set up our types. All right, so that was just a brief overview of union types. So let's move on to the next thing that we want to show you how to type. And the next thing we're going to show you is how to deal with functions that don't return anything, which we also call void types. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create another function and we're going to call it credit card used. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll set this equal to a function that's going to take in a credit card number, supposed to be a number, and we also want to pass in the expiration date. Expiration date, and that should also be set to, let's call it a number, string or a number. And all it's going to do is just return a void, right? Because this function isn't returning anything. It's just, it's void. It's a void function. And so we concatenate those same values out of our console.log, and we just pass in our two values again, and we log them. All right, so this is how we set void function types. Okay, remember that we still set our types as usual, but after our function is declared, we then use the void keyword, and that lets TypeScript know that we are expecting this function, not to necessarily return something. All right, so let's talk about promises. Okay, sorry. Okay, come on. All right, so this next part is going to show you how to add types to promises. So, all right, so let's say we want to have a function that's going to fetch some API and return some values, right? So how we would write that is export const, and let's say fetch credit card data. And we're going to set this equal to a URL. That URL is going to return a promise that's going to resolve some data. All right, so immediately you notice we have an error message inside of our function because it says, hey, parameter URL implicitly has an any type. So let's add a type to our URL string and that should get rid of that error. And then we're going to say we need to also set our function to a promise. So after we set our URL, right after our function is declared, we want to say promise, and then we can pass in a string. That's what we're expecting to be passed in. All right. And just to wrap this up, you could also concatenate this information here with a template literal and say data from URL. Okay. So let's see here. What's wrong with this? All right, so this is how we add types to promises. And lastly, I want to show you one more example of how to do this with REST parameters that you want to coalesce into a group of values. So let's say we have a welcome message, right? And it's going to be called const welcome message equals. And actually, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. So it's going to be const welcome message. And what it's going to do is it's going to take in some values, right? Because these are REST parameters. And we're going to have two values. We're going to have a welcome value, which is going to be a string. And we want to also have some names. So we're spreading over some names using the spread operator. And we want to also make sure we set a type to that as well. And so we're going to pass in string. And we're going to say it's an array of strings, right? And then we set that to that function type to string after we declare our function. And then what we can do is just do a simple return. Say return backticks. All right, the backticks go first, and then the dollar sign, and then the parentheses. And then we'll say welcome. Okay. This should be capital. That works. Okay, so in just a few short minutes, I showed you guys how to type regular functions, how to add types to functions that are stored as constants, how to add union types, which allow you to have more than one type for a particular value, as well as how to add types to promises and REST parameters. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and I will see you in the next video.